The SEAL team had spent 3 exhausting hours trying. 8 shooters, 4 spotters, every high-end system the U.S. military could throw at them. The finest long-range marksmen in naval special warfare. Men credited with shots that earned them classified praise and public admiration. They'd sent 37 rounds toward a target sitting 2,400 meters away, almost a mile and a half, across a Balkan valley, where the wind moved like a living creature and temperature layers shifted every 10 minutes. 37 attempts, 37 failures. That was when the Intelligence Support Activity Liaison finally stepped forward. She wore multicam fatigues that didn't fit quite right and carried a rifle case that looked heavier than she should reasonably manage. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet most of the irritated operators barely registered it. "I can make that shot." They laughed. Some outright laughed. But before we show you what happened when Reagan Foster demonstrated that impossible simply meant understanding physics better than everyone else on that mountainside, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Because what you're about to see isn't just a story about marksmanship. The Balkans in late autumn were brutally stunning. Mountains rose like jagged teeth beneath a sky that couldn't choose between gray and darker gray. The SEAL Task Force had been working this region for 6 weeks, hunting a warlord whose operations had destabilized 3 nations and left enough dead civilians to place him on every major international most wanted list. Intelligence finally locked onto his position, a fortified compound on the far side of a valley exactly 2,387 km from the only workable observation point, 2,387 meters, 1.48 miles. A distance so great that Earth's rotation had to be accounted for in the shot. A range where wind could shift direction 3 separate times during a bullet's flight, and muzzle temperature data meant almost nothing once the round reached the target. The SEALs chose a rocky ridge that offered a clean line of sight. They brought the best hardware available. Barrett M82A1 50 cal rifles, Schmidt and Bender optics worth more than luxury cars, Kestrel weather systems capable of near-laboratory accuracy, laser rangefinders precise to within a single meter. And they brought shooters, 8 of them with decades of sniper expertise. Master Chief Decker, who'd logged confirmed kills beyond 1-800 meters in Iraq. Petty Officer Hayes, once an instructor at the Naval Special Warfare Scout Sniper Course. Chief Martinez, a former international long-range competitor before joining the teams. These were not novices. They were elite professionals who had mastered their craft. But this valley was destroying them. Their first rounds were hopeful. Proper drops calculated, wind judged from the best available data, textbook breathing control, flawless trigger squeeze. Each bullet arced away and missed high and left, adjustments made, compensations added, recalculations done, another miss, low and right. The valley's atmosphere was chaos, refusing to behave according to any known pattern. Lieutenant Commander Stevens, the task force lead, was coordinating through satellite radio when Reagan Foster approached. She'd been attached as an intelligence support activity liaison, her role mainly to analyze and route information between agencies. For 3 weeks, she'd been nearly invisible, quiet, competent, doing her work without attracting attention. Now she stood beside the shooting line with a rifle case absolutely not listed on her issued gear. "Ma'am," Master Chief Decker muttered, irritation leaking through. "We're kind of busy." "I can see that," Foster answered. She was 31, average height, athletic but not remarkable, brown hair pulled into a regulation bun, a face forgotten 5 minutes after meeting her, the kind of person who'd mastered the art of blending into background noise. "You've been busy for 3 hours firing at a target that relocates in," she checked her watch. 5 hours and 43 minutes. "We're aware of the timeline," Decker growled. "If you've got input on weather models or ballistic math, we'll hear it. Otherwise, I can make that shot." The movement around the shooting line froze. SEALs who'd been analyzing wind readings, tweaking optics, or debating trajectory math all turned toward the ISA liaison, who had just claimed she could pull off what 8 elite snipers had failed to do for 3 straight hours. "Ma'am," Hayes said cautiously, "this isn't a controlled range. The conditions out here are unstable." Foster cut him off. "Multiple thermal layers producing erratic wind behavior, roughly a 15-degree temperature shift between our perch and the target's altitude. Coriolis effect fully relevant at this distance and latitude. Barometric pressure dropping as a weather front moves in." "I know. I've watched you try to solve this with gear and standard ballistic theory." She lowered her rifle case and opened it with the kind of efficiency that comes from muscle memory. Inside lay a rifle that made several SEALs raise their brows. A heavily customized Macmillan TAC-50, 50 caliber build, with enough bespoke modifications to show someone had invested years refining the system. "Where'd you get that?" Martinez asked, his professional curiosity briefly drowning out his doubt. "Built it myself over 3 years, Foster said, lifting it free. Bartlein custom barrel. Trigger work by the lead gunsmith at Accuracy International. Stock-shaped for my exact biomechanics. This rifle has made confirmed shots past 2,800 meters under controlled circumstances." Lieutenant Commander Stevens ended his radio transmission and approached to see why the entire firing line had gone silent. "Ms. Foster, I wasn't informed you had long-range shooting credentials." "You weren't meant to be informed," Foster answered plainly. "My main task here is intelligence liaison. But before ISA, I served with the Army Marksmanship Unit. Before that, I shot international long-range competitions. And before that—" She hesitated, choosing her words. "Other things not listed in my official resume." Stevens examined her the way someone does when they're trained to judge capability under pressure. Something about her calmness, the grounded assurance in her posture, the way she handled the rifle like it was part of her frame. None of it looked like ego. It looked like someone who knew her limits and knew she wasn't near them. "You believe you can make a shot my top shooters can't?" Stevens said, though it wasn't truly a question. "I don't believe I know." Foster was locking components together with motions that came from thousands of hours on the gun. "Your shooters are outstanding, but they're trying to fix this with formulas and tools. This valley demands intuition, an instinctive grasp of atmospheric physics you don't get from manuals." Decker's jaw clenched. "Ma'am, I've been doing long-range work for 15 years. I've made kills in every terrain, from Arctic tundra to open desert. What makes you think you understand this valley better than—" "Because I've been watching it for 3 hours while you've been shooting at it," Foster said, not harshly, but with absolute certainty. "Watch and learn, or don't." Foster moved to the firing line with the calm certainty of someone who'd lived behind precision rifles for years. She slid into a prone position with fluid mechanics that made it obvious this wasn't her first time doing something like this. The TAC-50 settled into her shoulder as if it had been built around her frame, which, in many ways, it had. "I need absolute silence," she said softly. "No talking, no movement anywhere near me, and I need 30 minutes to read the conditions before I fire." Stevens made a call that could either save the mission or end his career, depending entirely on whatever happened in the next half hour. Maintain your positions, but cease fire. Ms. Foster owns the range. The SEALs exchanged looks that drifted from disbelief to irritation. 3 hours of failure, and now an ISA liaison claimed she could accomplish what 8 top-tier shooters couldn't. But Stevens had spoken, and SEALs followed orders, even ones they hated. Foster ignored the tension and focused entirely on the valley, the real adversary. What unfolded over the next 30 minutes appeared like nothing to the untrained eye. Foster lay behind her rifle, unmoving except for slow, precise shifts. Sometimes she lifted her head to observe the valley through a tiny spotting scope. Sometimes she jotted figures into a notebook. Mostly she watched, still and silent. But what she was doing was anything but simple. Foster was reading the valley the way a composer reads a score, recognizing rhythms that weren't visible to standard observation. She studied how tree lines bent in specific pockets, how the bending changed with altitude. She tracked miniature dust devils forming and collapsing, mapping their drift to understand ground-level turbulence. She watched heat shimmers shifting across the valley floor, subtle ripples revealing stacked temperature layers. Every few minutes, she pulled a handheld anemometer and took wind readings from slightly altered angles or elevations. She was building a 3-dimensional model of airflow, observing not just horizontal patterns, but the vertical currents created when temperature differences generated pressure gradients that shoved air in unexpected directions. Through her scope, she monitored the compound with unwavering patience. The warlord drifted through the courtyard, speaking to guards, occasionally vanishing into interior structures. She noted the timing, the rhythm of his movements, extrapolated where he would likely be as conditions changed. She identified the exact future moment when atmospheric alignment and his position would intersect to create a shot window. She wasn't just analyzing conditions, she was predicting them, constructing a 4-dimensional map of what the air would be doing in every part of the bullet's flight path, 7 seconds into the future. The SEALs slowly stopped pretending not to watch her. Hayes lifted his own spotting scope and tried to decipher the patterns she was studying. After 10 minutes, he lowered it, baffled. Martinez watched her with the interest of a professional recognizing another professional. The way she'd take a reading, shift 3 feet, then take another. The way she observed distant terrain markers and scribbled what looked more like advanced fluid dynamics equations than anything found in sniper manuals. "She's mapping atmospheric layers," Martinez murmured to Hayes. "Not just wind speed. She's tracking how pressure systems interact at changing heights. That's basically graduate-level meteorology applied to ballistics." At the 20-minute mark, Foster pulled a weather meter and collected readings at multiple elevations around their perch, moving higher and lower to capture the gradient spread. Her breathing had slowed. Her focus narrowed so completely that nothing existed but the valley and its shifting physics. She returned to her primary position and began adjusting her scope. The numbers she dialed in looked absurd to anyone watching. Far too much elevation, wind compensation in what appeared the wrong direction, data that didn't match the Kestrel readings. But Foster wasn't setting her rifle for current conditions. She was setting it for the atmospheric environment her bullet would encounter during each microsecond of its 7-second flight through air that behaved like a living organism. At 28 minutes, she lowered herself into her final firing stance. Her breathing softened to near stillness. Her body settled into absolute relaxation, the kind that comes only from years of training under pressure. Her right hand wrapped the pistol grip with instinctive steadiness, her finger resting on the trigger with microscopic control. Target is in optimal position, she whispered. Probability window opens in 60 seconds. I'm taking the shot. Stephen shifted to where he could observe through a spotting scope. The high-value target stood in the courtyard, speaking to his men, completely unaware that a bullet was about to travel nearly 1.5 miles toward him. Decker positioned himself beside another scope, preparing to call the miss. He was sure it would miss. Everyone missed under these conditions. 37 failures had already proven that. But he was still a professional, and part of him hoped she would prove them all wrong. Foster's breathing vanished into silence. Her body settled into that absolute stillness reserved for true masters of the craft, the kind of immobility that turned rifle and shooter into a single calibrated instrument. Every contact point was perfect, shaped by thousands of hours behind precision weapons. She felt her pulse and timed the coming shot for the brief stillness between heartbeats, the moment when her body became a stable firing platform. She waited for something only she could detect, a fleeting alignment of atmospheric variables across the entire valley that would let her round survive the impossible journey and land exactly where she intended. The wind at their position nudged left to right at 4 mph, but Foster knew that 800 mph out it reversed to a 7 mph right-to-left push. At 1600 mph, thermal columns rising from the valley floor would force the bullet upward, changing drag coefficients. And in the last 400 mph, swirling currents shaped by the compound structures would apply yet another directional influence. She had charted every one of these layers, calculated every influence, and now she was waiting for the single instant when her bullet could slip through the valley's chaotic atmospheric labyrinth and hit the precise point she'd chosen. 30 seconds, 20, 10. Then, at the exact instant her calculations predicted, she fired. The TAC-50 thundered with a deep, violent recoil. A 50 cal doesn't whisper, it announces itself with authority. But Foster's posture was so perfect that the rifle drove straight back, her alignment undisturbed. The suppressor softened the blast, but couldn't hide the raw force of launching a 750-grain projectile at 2,800 feet per second. The bullet tore from the muzzle and entered an environment determined to shove it off course. At 0.2 seconds, it sliced through the 4 mph crosswind at their position, drifting a hair off its bore line. At 1.1 seconds, it reached a thermal layer where warm air rising from the valley floor lifted the projectile higher than friction-based models would usually predict. At 2.4 seconds, it hit the 7 mph right-to-left wind band, a push that nudged it back toward the predicted centerline. Seemingly luck, but entirely intentional. At 388 seconds, it reached peak altitude, nearly 280 feet above the target's elevation, then began falling through colder, denser air that altered its velocity and ballistic curve in ways no standard equation could fully capture. At 5.2 seconds, the eastern ridge's crosswinds shoved it leftward, a deviation Foster had pre-compensated for 2 minutes before firing. At 6.5 seconds, it dropped through the ground-level turbulence around the compound, where swirling gusts danced unpredictably between buildings. At 7:28 seconds, the bullet arrived. The SEALs watched through their scopes, braced for another miss. High, low, left, right, anything but a hit. 7 seconds was an eternity in long-range shooting, a span filled with too many changing variables for any human to track. But Foster wasn't just any human. The high-value target folded instantly, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. One moment he was speaking to his security chief, pointing toward the distant mountains. The next, a crimson mist replaced the top of his skull, and he collapsed, lifeless, to the ground. 7.28 seconds of flight, 2,387 meters of atmospheric chaos that had humiliated the 8 best marksmen naval special warfare had to offer. One trigger pull, one perfect hit, first round. The compound exploded into panic. Guards scattered for cover, shouting orders, desperately searching for a threat they would never locate. Medics sprinted toward the fallen warlord, but anyone with even basic training could see the truth. The shot was instantly fatal, unimaginably precise for that distance. Decker lowered his spotting scope slowly, awe widening his eyes. "Holy Mother of God," he whispered. "She nailed it." First on shot. Hayes shook his head, stunned beyond words. That shouldn't be possible. The wind shifts alone make the math absurd. How did she... "She didn't use our data," Martinez said quietly, his voice tinged with near reverence. "She built her own atmospheric model. Every layer of wind, every pressure shift, every thermal. She calculated the entire air column second by second, not just what the wind is doing right now. Stevens was already confirming the kill with overhead ISR assets. The target was dead. The mission concluded after 3 brutal months of effort. Foster was calmly breaking down her rifle, the same disciplined precision she'd shown during assembly. No celebration, no ego, just the composed satisfaction of a professional who solved a problem exactly as intended. Her hands worked automatically, the mechanics handled by muscle memory, while her mind moved on to whatever came next. "Miss Foster," Stevens said as he ended his radio call and approached the firing line. "That was the most extraordinary display of marksmanship I've witnessed in 23 years of service." "Thank you, sir," Foster replied, while locking her rifle back into its case. "The conditions were more stable than they looked. Once I mapped the pressure gradients and thermal layers, the answer became relatively simple." "Relatively simple," Decker echoed, sounding torn between admiration and disbelief. "Ma'am, I've been shooting long-range my whole adult life. What you just pulled off isn't simple. That's nearly miraculous." Foster met his stare with a steady, patient expression. "Master Chief, people call it a miracle when they don't understand the expertise behind it. What I did was apply atmospheric physics and ballistics far beyond standard military instruction. It seems like magic only because you were never trained to recognize the patterns I'm reading." She stood and slung the rifle case over her shoulder. "Your 37 attempts weren't failures. They were data points. They showed me the valley's atmospheric tendencies and confirmed my theoretical model. Every round you fired taught me something about how the air was behaving. You laid the groundwork. I just approached it with a different analytical lens. It was a diplomatic way of saying she'd spent 3 hours watching them miss and used their misses as raw scientific input for her own calculations. A few SEALs bristled, but most understood the honesty in what she'd said. Truth without ego or insult. "Walk me through it," Martinez said abruptly. "The whole process. I want to understand how you modeled the atmosphere at that detail." Foster hesitated, then decided the explanation was worth it. She opened her notebook and began outlining her methods using sketches and equations that made Martinez's eyes widen with every page. "You're applying Navier-Stokes equations to fluid motion in terrain like this," Martinez said, tracing one of the formulas. "That's computational fluid dynamics. Usually you need a supercomputer, or 8 years of practice developing the intuition to estimate the solutions in real time. I can't run the full computations in my head," Foster answered, "but I can recognize patterns that hint at certain atmospheric behaviors. Then I use simplified models to get close enough for a usable firing solution." She flipped through more pages, pressure differentials mapped into zones, vertical turbulence charts, predicted shifts over time. Then the full ballistic integration accounting for the bullet's position at every fraction of every second of flight. "This is PhD-level physics," Martinez said quietly. "Where did you learn this?" "MIT," Foster replied. "Doctorate in atmospheric physics, predictive modeling for chaotic air systems." "The Army Marksmanship Unit recruited me because someone figured my research might have tactical value. They turned out to be correct." Stevens was connecting the dots. ISA brought in specialists with talents traditional units didn't have. Foster's official job was intelligence liaison, but her real strength was solving complex problems that lived between multiple scientific and operational fields. "The compound is secure," Stevens said while checking his tablet. "Local authorities are handling confirmation and site exploitation. We need to move to secondary before they coordinate a response." The team packed their gear with routine efficiency. Foster worked beside them as if she'd been part of the element for years, moving with practiced field discipline that hinted at real ground experience despite her intelligence role. As they advanced along the exfil route planned earlier, Hayes drifted up beside her. "Ma'am, can I ask something?" "Of course." "That shot, was it really simple once you mapped everything? Or were you just being polite?" Foster considered the question as they moved across broken terrain toward their extraction. "Honestly, it was about 70% calculated and 30% informed guesswork at that distance. In conditions like those, you can't capture every variable. But if you understand the dominant patterns well enough, your guesses are better than luck. Today, my guess was right." 70-30, Hayes repeated softly. "Most shooters wouldn't fire with 30% uncertainty. Most shooters have other choices," Foster said. "You had 37 rounds to refine your approach. I had one. One chance. In that scenario, 70-30 is better than letting the mission fail. So you take the shot and trust your training." The idea resonated with the SEALs, men used to operating with incomplete data, forced to make high-stakes decisions without perfect information. Foster might be ISA, might have a doctorate in physics, but she understood their mindset. The willingness to accept calculated risk when the objective demanded it. Extraction went clean. They hit their rally point, linked with pre-staged vehicles, and were back inside their forward operating base long before hostile forces in the valley had time to organize any pursuit. By the time local security forces reached the compound, the SEAL element was already 50 miles away, beginning debrief procedures and cycling through equipment checks. The mission report was crafted with deliberate vagueness. Target neutralized at extended range by task force sniper element. Technical specifics classified. Method of engagement classified. Contributing personnel classified. The kind of sanitized summary that satisfied higher headquarters' need for confirmation while protecting capabilities that should never appear in any unclassified system. Still, inside naval special warfare circles, the story spread fast. The ISA liaison who'd made a shot 8 SEALs couldn't. The fusion of physics and intuition accomplishing what cutting-edge tech couldn't. The quiet operator who'd concealed world-class skill beneath a job title that didn't even hint at what she truly brought to the field. 3 days after the shot, Stevens found Foster in the operations center, reviewing intelligence documents with the same meticulous discipline she applied to everything. "We need to talk," he said. They stepped into a secured planning room. Stevens handed her a tablet showing a message from Naval Special Warfare Command, a formal request for her temporary attachment to train SEAL snipers in extreme-range shooting and advanced atmospheric modeling. "They want you to teach," Stevens said, "to pass on whatever sorcery you used to make that shot." Foster read the message with a neutral calm. "I don't know if I can teach this. It took 8 years before I could consistently hit beyond 2,000 meters. That isn't something you compress into a short course. They're not asking for a course. They want you embedded for 6 months, working with instructors, mentoring, sharing what you can." Stevens exhaled slowly. "In 23 years with the teams, I've never seen a first-round hit under conditions that broke every tech solution we had. That's a capability the military needs to understand, or at least document. And if it can't be replicated," Foster said quietly, "then at least we'll have you. Someone to call when everything else fails." Stevens held her gaze. That shot erased 3 months of planning and probably saved lives by removing a man destabilizing an entire region. That kind of value doesn't fit neatly inside organizational boundaries. Foster weighed it silently. Part of her wanted to stay low visibility, the anonymity that had protected her career. But another part, the part that had poured years into mastering extreme-range physics, recognized an opportunity to pass on knowledge that might save operators one day. "6 months," she said at last. "But I keep my ISA duties. I'm still subject to operational tasking, and the training stays classified. My methods don't go public." "Agreed," Stevens said, extending his hand. "Welcome to the community, Ms. Foster." Over the next 6 months, Reagan Foster became a quiet legend throughout special operations. She trained SEAL snipers, Army Special Forces precision shooters, Marine Scout snipers, and Air Force Special Operations teams, teaching atmospheric modeling far beyond anything in conventional ballistic doctrine. Her classes were small, never more than 8 students, and admission was selective. Applicants needed strong mathematical backgrounds, ideally with exposure to fluid dynamics or atmospheric sciences. Many washed out. They could follow the equations but couldn't develop the intuitive sense required to see atmospheric patterns in the real world. But those who succeeded pushed the boundaries of what long-range precision was believed to be. They learned to read terrain like a 3-dimensional atmospheric atlas, to sense invisible air movement, to calculate firing solutions that treated the atmosphere as a living, shifting medium rather than a static number. Foster didn't just teach math. She taught perception, an understanding that the air itself was alive, moving, breathing, shaping opportunities for shooters disciplined enough to wait for the single moment when everything aligned. At extreme ranges, she taught, shooting stopped being about equipment and became the art of reading the world in motion. "The rifle is just a tool," she told her students during a brutally difficult session in the Montana mountains. "The scope, the rangefinder, the ballistic computer, they're all just tools. What matters is the meat computer behind the optic, your brain. Your ability to process environmental data faster than technology can measure it. That's what separates competent long-range shooters from the ones who can make shots people call impossible." She took them to unforgiving terrain, mountain wind channels, desert heat shimmer, coastal regions where marine layers twisted air into knots, and forced them to attempt shots traditional doctrine insisted could not be made. Then she walked them through the process, teaching them how to dissect the chaos, identify patterns, and build mental models that made the atmosphere predictable instead of antagonistic. Not everyone could absorb what she taught. Some had the mathematical chops, but lacked the spatial intuition to build 3-dimensional atmospheric models in their minds. Others had natural shooting instincts, but couldn't grasp the physics that made extreme range precision possible. But a few, maybe 1 in 20, got it. Those few reached that rare intersection where training and talent fused into something greater than either alone. Those were the shooters who became the military's answer for targets at ranges once considered unreachable. Martinez was one of them. The SEAL chief had the right mix of competitive shooting history, mathematical ability, and relentless determination to master Foster's methodology. By the end of 6 months, he'd logged confirmed hits past 2,200 mellow and field conditions that would have crushed him before her training. "You gave me a new way of seeing," Martinez told her during their final session. "I thought I understood long-range work, but you showed me I'd only been looking at 2 dimensions when the real problem lives in 4. Time matters as much as distance. Predicting where the conditions will be matters more than measuring what they are now." Foster nodded, pleased that some students truly absorbed the foundational principles. Remember, technology is a crutch. Use it for baseline data, but don't depend on it at extreme distances. Trust your training. Trust your ability to read what the atmosphere is telling you. The wind never lies if you know how to listen. The shot in the Balkans stayed classified, but it became the invisible benchmark, the quiet legend whispered through special operations circles. 2,987 meters, first round hit, impossible conditions. The standard by which all others compared themselves. After 6 months, Foster returned to her ISA role, fading back into the background position that allowed her to operate without attracting spotlight or scrutiny. But her influence lingered. Her students went on to make shots previously dismissed as fantasy, and when the impossible was required, when conventional methods failed and someone needed to turn physics itself into a weapon, her name surfaced in classified planning rooms. Because some problems demanded someone who understood that impossible was just a placeholder for an approach no one had discovered yet. And Reagan Foster had spent her entire professional life uncovering approaches that weren't supposed to exist. 5 years later, the request came through encrypted channels routed through command pathways buried in bureaucratic shadows. Emerging situation in the Middle East. A target at extreme range. Conditions beating every ballistic solution conventional snipers could devise. Timeline measured in hours instead of days. Foster read the operational brief with cool detachment. She'd taken hundreds of long-range shots since that day in the Balkans, though none demanded the same level of distance coupled with atmospheric insanity. She'd kept pushing her knowledge, refining atmospheric models, integrating new research, expanding her predictive frameworks. The target sat 2,147 meters away, nearly 1.65 miles across terrain that made the Balkans seem almost forgiving. Desert heat shimmer that warped optics, wind patterns shaped by violent temperature swings, an environment so unstable it might as well have been alive. It was the kind of shot that would require every ounce of what she'd learned over 15 years of absolute obsession. She packed her custom TAC-50, the rifle that had effectively become an extension of her body after thousands of hours of disciplined training. She updated her atmospheric modeling software with the newest meteorological data from the target area. She reviewed satellite imagery, constructing mental terrain maps to anticipate how the land would shape air movement. Then she sent back a one-word reply. Approved. 24 hours later, she was on a ridgeline overlooking a compound where a high-value terrorist had taken shelter. The local SEAL detachment had been attempting the shot for 6 hours. 12 shooters, 43 attempts, 0 impacts. Foster spent 90 minutes studying the environment. The desert atmosphere was even more chaotic than the Balkans had been. Heat driving violent convection currents. air twisting unpredictably, dust devils appearing and dying without warning, mirages distorting optical ranges until conventional methods became useless. But Foster didn't use conventional methods. She mapped the turbulence, found structure inside the apparent disorder, identified the rhythm of heat as it moved through the valley, tracked the pressure gradients that shoved air in patterns instruments couldn't register, but trained perception could. When she finally took the shot, she did it with the same quiet certainty she'd shown 5 years earlier in the Balkans. The bullet flew for 8.1 seconds through air that tried constantly to push it off its path. It knifed through thermal layers, fought crosswinds, corrected through shifting pressure zones, compensating for microscopic changes every fraction of a second, and it hit exactly where Foster had calculated it would. The target fell. Mission complete. Another impossible shot made possible by expertise forged at the intersection of physics, mathematics, and intuition, sharpened over years of relentless practice. The SEAL snipers watching through their scopes were silent at first. Then one of them, a young shooter who'd been struggling for hours, finally spoke into the quiet. How does she do that? His team leader, a seasoned operator who already knew the truth, answered calmly. Because she's Reagan Foster. And for her, impossible is just physics other people haven't learned yet. Reagan Foster continued working as an ISA liaison, moving through military units with the same understated professionalism she'd carried her entire career. Most of the people around her never learned what she was capable of. To them, she was just another intelligence specialist, writing reports, coordinating data flow, doing the job. But buried in classified files, her name remained on a very short list, the people to call when traditional solutions collapsed. When targets were so far away that standard doctrine failed, when air patterns were too unstable for technology to keep up. The wolf doesn't announce itself to the sheep. It waits, patient and silent, watching, studying, understanding the terrain others only glance at. And when the moment arrives, when distance and chaos merge into a problem deemed impossible, the wolf makes the shot everyone else said could not be made. Every single time. Because impossible is just a failure of imagination, and Reagan Foster had spent her entire life imagining methods that conventional wisdom insisted didn't exist. The SEALs called it impossible at 2,400 meters. She called it physics, and physics doesn't care about opinion. It only requires understanding. Understanding she possessed in overwhelming measure. The understanding built from 8 years of graduate study, 15 years of real-world application, and thousands of shots fired under conditions that would break any other shooter. Understanding that turned the impossible into the inevitable, every time, without exception. That's what true mastery looks like when it reaches a level most people cannot begin to comprehend. Quiet, professional, absolutely lethal. The way it should be. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales of courage.